I married her to honor a promise, not knowing she would become the only promise I'd ever regret breaking. The rain started before the casket touched the ground, soft at first, then steady, like the sky itself had decided this moment deserved silence instead of sound. I stood there in a black coat that cost more than most people's rent, watching as they lowered my best friend into the earth, 6 feet down, 6 feet away from everything we used to be. The men around me kept their distance, respectful, quiet, but I could feel their eyes, waiting, measuring, wondering what I would do next. Because in my world, grief wasn't something you showed. It was something you buried deeper than the body in front of you. I didn't cry. I didn't move. I just stared at the polished wood as it disappeared inch by inch, remembering the last time I saw him alive. The way his voice had been weaker than I'd ever heard. The way his hand had gripped mine like it was the only thing keeping him here. Take care of her, he had said, each word slower than the last. Promise me, Adrian. I had nodded without thinking. Because that's what you do for a brother. You say yes before you understand what yes actually means. The rain soaked through my collar, cold against my skin, but I didn't step back. I didn't leave. Not until the last shovel of dirt hit the casket with that dull, final sound. That was the moment it became real. That was the moment I realized promises don't end when people die. They begin. The lawyer found me before I even made it back to the car, his umbrella tilted awkwardly against the wind, his expression tight like he was carrying something heavier than a briefcase. Mr. Volkov, there's a clause, he said, voice careful, measured. I almost walked past him. Almost. Make it quick, I replied, already done with this day, already done with everything that came with it. But then he said her name, Emily Carter, and something in the way he said it made me stop. Your friends will requires you to marry her, he continued, each word landing slower than the rain. It's tied to the inheritance. If you refuse, everything transfers to external trustees. I stared at him, not because I didn't understand, but because I did. Perfectly. This wasn't a request. It wasn't even a favor. It was a condition. A contract written by a man who trusted me enough to tie his entire legacy to my word. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding, my gaze drifting back toward the grave, now just fresh dirt and silence. Who is she? I asked finally. The lawyer hesitated, just for a second. His cousin, he said. She's not part of your world. I almost laughed at that. Not part of my world. As if that had ever stopped anything before. As if the world didn't bend when I decided it should. But something about the way he said it lingered. Not fear. Not doubt. Just uncertainty. I adjusted my cuffs, rain dripping from the edge of my sleeve, and nodded once. Decision made. Set it up, I said, my voice steady, controlled, the same voice that had built everything I owned. Because at that moment, it was simple. A promise was a promise. And I always kept mine. I just didn't know. This one would cost me everything. I saw her for the first time 3 days later, and the first thing I felt was disappointment, not because she had done anything wrong, but because she did not look like someone who belonged anywhere near my world. She stood near the window of the attorney's office, hands folded in front of her like she was trying to take up less space, wearing a soft blue dress that looked like it had been chosen for comfort instead of impression. Her hair was pulled back in a simple tie, a few strands falling loose around her face, and there was nothing calculated about her presence, nothing sharp, nothing dangerous. She looked ordinary, not weak, not fragile, just untouched by the kind of life I lived. When she turned toward me, her eyes met mine for half a second before dropping, not out of fear, but something quieter, something like caution. Emily Carter, the lawyer said, as if I had not already guessed. She nodded once, then offered a small, polite smile that did not reach her eyes. Mr. Volkov, she said, her voice steady but soft, the kind of voice that did not demand attention and yet refused to disappear. I did not return the smile. I studied her instead the way I studied everything, looking for leverage, for weakness, for anything that would explain why my friend had tied his entire legacy to her name. I found none of it. Just a woman standing in the wrong room with the wrong people. You understand the arrangement, I said, skipping anything that resembled warmth. She hesitated, just enough to be noticeable. I understand what was written, she replied. Not what she felt, not what she wanted, just what was written. That told me more than anything else could. She did not agree with this. She was simply accepting it. The same way I was. The lawyer began explaining timelines, paperwork, conditions, but I barely listened. My attention stayed on her, on the way she kept her shoulders relaxed even when the conversation turned into something that would make most people nervous, on the way she nodded at the appropriate moments without interrupting, without pushing. She was not trying to negotiate. She was not trying to impress me. That was new. Everyone tried to impress me. Everyone wanted something. The ceremony can be arranged within 72 hours, the lawyer concluded, looking between us like we were signing a business deal instead of stepping into something that would bind two lives together. I glanced at her again. Is that a problem? I asked. She shook her head. No, she said. Then, after a pause, it will not change anything if I say yes or no, will it? There was no accusation in her tone, just a quiet understanding that made something shift in the air between us. I could have lied. I could have softened it. I did not. No, I answered. She exhaled slowly, almost like she had expected that answer and just needed to hear it out loud. Then she nodded once more, firmer this time. Then let us not waste time, she said. That was the moment I realized she was not as simple as she looked. Not because she argued, but because she did not. Because she saw the situation clearly and chose to step into it anyway. Most people resisted power. She adapted to it. And for the first time since the funeral, something about this arrangement did not feel entirely under my control. I did not like that feeling. Not then. Not ever. But I ignored it, the same way I ignored everything that did not fit into the structure I had built my life on. This was temporary. A contract. A promise fulfilled. Nothing more. That was what I told myself as I signed the papers, as I watched her sign hers, her handwriting neat and careful like she was trying to keep something steady in a world that had already decided otherwise. I told myself this would be simple. I told myself she would be easy to forget. I was wrong. The wedding lasted exactly 14 minutes, and not a second of it felt like it belonged to either of us. The room was quiet in the way expensive places always are, polished marble floors, tall windows letting in filtered daylight, everything designed to look effortless and controlled, just like the life I had built. Emily stood across from me in a simple white dress that did not try to impress anyone. No heavy lace, no glitter, nothing that demanded attention, and yet somehow she was the only thing in the room that did not feel artificial. She kept her hands still at her sides, fingers lightly intertwined, her posture calm but not stiff, like she had already accepted this moment long before she walked into it. The officiant spoke, his voice steady, practiced, reading words that were supposed to mean something, but to me they sounded like terms in a contract, clean, emotionless, binding. I answered when it was my turn, my voice even, controlled, the same tone I used in every negotiation, every decision that shaped my world. I do. 2 words. Nothing more. When Emily spoke, her voice was softer, but it did not shake. I do. Not hesitation. Not fear. Just quiet acceptance. That was what unsettled me. Most people reacted to me. They feared me, challenged me, tried to impress me, but she did none of those things. She simply stood there and met the moment without resistance. And somehow that made everything feel less predictable. The rings were exchanged, cool metal against skin, a symbol that carried more weight than either of us acknowledged out loud. When I slipped the ring onto her finger, I noticed the smallest detail. Her hand was warm, steady, not pulling away, not reaching forward either, just present. Like her. Always present, never demanding. When she placed the ring on mine, her touch was brief, careful, as if she understood boundaries that had never been spoken. You may kiss the bride, the officiant said, out of habit more than expectation. I did not move. Neither did she. After a second, I gave a slight nod, enough to satisfy the room, enough to close the ceremony without crossing a line that neither of us seemed interested in crossing. It was done. Just like that. A marriage reduced to paperwork and silence. As we stepped away, a few people offered polite congratulations, voices low, measured, as if they were unsure whether this was something to celebrate or simply acknowledge. I did not linger. I never did. Outside, the air felt different, cooler, clearer, like stepping out of something that had no weight until you left it behind. My car was already waiting, engine running, driver standing by the door. I glanced at Emily. You will be staying at my place, I said, not asking, just stating what had already been decided. She nodded once. I assumed so. No argument. No questions. That should have made things easier. It did not. The drive was silent, the city moving past the tinted windows in blurred reflections of steel and glass. People living lives that had nothing to do with ours. Emily sat beside me, looking out the window, not at me, not at her ring, just watching the world as if she was memorizing something she might not see again. I did not interrupt her. I did not need to. When we arrived, the gates opened without hesitation, security stepping aside as the car rolled into the long driveway leading up to the house that had been built to impress and intimidate in equal measure. As she stepped out, she paused for half a second, her eyes lifting to take in the scale of it, the size, the distance between this place and anything that resembled normal. But she did not comment. She did not react the way most people did. She simply took a breath and walked forward. That was when I realized something I had not expected. She was not overwhelmed. She was adjusting. And for the first time since this arrangement began, I had the distinct feeling that I was the one stepping into unfamiliar territory, not her. I told myself it did not matter, that she would learn her place, that this would remain simple. But as I watched her walk through the front doors, without hesitation, I felt something I had not felt in a long time. Uncertainty. And I did not like it. The house was quiet in a way that did not feel peaceful, more like everything inside it had learned to stay silent without being told. Emily stepped into the foyer, her shoes barely making a sound against the polished floor, her eyes moving slowly across the space, not wide with awe, not narrowed with judgment, just observing. Most people reacted immediately when they entered my world. They either admired it or feared it, but she did neither. She simply took it in, as if she was trying to understand it rather than be impressed by it. I watched her from a few steps behind, my hands in my pockets, already calculating how this would work, where she would stay, what boundaries needed to be set to keep everything exactly where it belonged. You will have your own wing, I said, my voice echoing slightly in the open space, controlled, deliberate. Everything you need will be provided. She turned her head slightly, not fully facing me, just enough to acknowledge that she heard me. Thank you, she replied, the words simple, polite, but not grateful in the way most people sounded when they spoke to me. It was not appreciation. It was acknowledgement. There was a difference. A staff member approached quietly, offering to take her bag, but Emily shook her head with a small smile. I have it, she said, her tone gentle but firm, and the staff member immediately stepped back, unsure whether to insist or retreat. I noticed that. The way she did not demand control, but still kept it. This way, I said, turning toward the staircase, expecting her to follow. She did, her steps steady, unhurried, not trying to match my pace, not falling behind either. Just moving at her own rhythm. It was subtle, but it disrupted something I had grown used to. Everyone else adjusted to me. She did not. When we reached the hallway that led to her rooms, I stopped and gestured toward the double doors. You can make any changes you want, I said. If something is not to your liking, it will be replaced. She paused at the doorway, her hand resting lightly against the frame, her eyes scanning the space inside, the large windows, the carefully arranged furniture, the kind of room that was designed to feel like comfort without ever actually being lived in. It is already more than enough, she said quietly. Then she stepped inside. I did not follow immediately. I stood there for a moment, watching her from the threshold as she placed her bag down on the bed, her movements careful, deliberate, like she respected the space but did not feel owned by it. She walked to the window, her fingers brushing lightly against the curtain before pulling it back just enough to let in more light. Not fully, just enough. I frowned slightly. Most people would have opened it completely, claimed the view, taken everything they could from it. She adjusted it instead, controlled it. That same pattern again. Dinner will be at 7, I said, breaking the silence. She turned back toward me, giving a small nod. I will be there. No questions. No hesitation. Just acceptance. I started to leave, already done with the interaction, already moving back into the structure of my routine, when her voice stopped me. Mr. Volkov. I turned slightly, not fully facing her. Yes. She hesitated for a second, not unsure, just choosing her words carefully. You do not have to change your life because of this, she said. I will not interfere. I looked at her then, really looked at her, trying to understand why she would say that, why she would offer distance before I had even demanded it. Most people wanted access, influence, position. She was offering the opposite. That will not be necessary, I replied, my tone sharper than intended. Everything is already arranged. She held my gaze for a brief moment, then nodded once. Of course. No argument. No pushback. Just that quiet acceptance again. I left without another word, but as I walked down the hallway, something stayed with me, something I could not immediately define. She was not trying to take anything from me. She was not trying to change anything either. And for some reason, that made her more unpredictable than anyone I had ever dealt with. Because I knew how to control people who wanted something. I knew how to handle those who resisted. But someone who asked for nothing and accepted everything on her own terms, that was something else entirely. And I had the unsettling feeling that I had just invited that uncertainty into my home. Dinner was exactly at 7, not a minute earlier, not a minute later, because that was how things worked in my house. Precise, predictable, controlled, and for the first time in a long time, I found myself aware of the seconds as they passed, not because I cared about the meal, but because I was waiting to see if she would follow the structure or disrupt it without even trying. When Emily walked into the dining room, she was on time, neither early nor late, and somehow that felt intentional, like she had already understood the rhythm of a place she had only been in for a few hours. She wore the same calm expression, her hair still loosely tied back, her dress simple, unchanged, as if she saw no reason to transform herself just to fit into a setting that had already decided what it was. The table was set for two, long and polished, more space than necessary, more distance than comfort, and she took the seat across from me without waiting to be told, without hesitation, without looking for permission. I noticed that immediately. Most people waited. She did not. The staff moved quietly, placing dishes, pouring water, adjusting details that no one had asked for but were always expected, and Emily thanked them each time, softly, directly, meeting their eyes in a way that made them pause for half a second longer than usual before stepping away. Respect, not politeness. There was a difference. I watched it happen, saying nothing, observing the small shift in the room that had nothing to do with me. Is the food to your liking? I asked after a moment, more out of habit than interest. She glanced down briefly, then back at me. It is, she said. Thank you. No exaggeration. No attempt to impress. Just the truth, delivered simply. I leaned back slightly, studying her again, trying to find the angle I had missed, the reason behind her composure, the expectation she was hiding, because everyone had one. Everyone wanted something. If you need anything, I said, my tone measured, you can inform the staff. They will take care of it. She nodded once. I understand. Then she added, after a small pause, but I will try not to need much. That caught my attention. I set my glass down slowly. That is not necessary, I replied. You are not here as a guest. She met my gaze then, steady, unflinching, not challenging, just present. I know, she said. That is why I said it. For a second, neither of us spoke. The silence was not uncomfortable. It was different, like something was being established without either of us stating it directly. I broke it first. You should get accustomed to this environment, I said. There will be events, gatherings. You will be expected to attend. She lowered her eyes briefly, considering, then nodded. If that is required, I will do my best. Not I will enjoy it. Not I will fit in. Just I will do my best. Always that same pattern. Acceptance without surrender. It was subtle, but it was there. The rest of the meal passed without much conversation, the kind of silence that would make most people uneasy, but she did not rush to fill it, did not fidget, did not look for distraction. She simply existed within it, as if silence was something she understood better than words. When she finished, she placed her utensils down neatly, not waiting for anyone to signal the end, not asking if she could leave. Thank you for the meal, she said, her voice calm. Then she stood. I watched her for a moment, expecting her to say something else, to hesitate, to seek direction, but she did none of that. She simply turned and walked out of the room at her own pace, her steps quiet, unhurried, leaving behind a space that felt slightly different than it had before she entered it. I remained seated, my hand resting against the table, my mind replaying every detail of that interaction, every small deviation from what I was used to. She had not tried to impress me. She had not tried to resist me. She had simply been herself. And for the first time, I began to understand that this was not going to be as simple as I had planned. Because the most difficult people to control were not the ones who fought you. It was the ones who did not need anything from you at all. The next morning, I expected the house to feel the same, controlled, predictable, untouched by anything that did not belong to me. But something was different, subtle enough that I could not name it immediately, but present enough that I noticed it the moment I stepped into the hallway. It was quieter, not in volume, but in tension, like something had shifted beneath the surface. I moved through the space the way I always did, measured, aware, but my attention caught on small details that had never required my attention before. A vase on the console table had been moved slightly to the left, not randomly, but aligned with the edge of the wall in a way that made the space feel balanced instead of decorative. The curtains in the sitting room were opened just enough to let in morning light without exposing the entire room. The same adjustment I had seen her make the night before. It was not dramatic. It was intentional. I frowned slightly, not because it was wrong, but because it was different, and different meant change, and change meant variables I had not accounted for. When I entered the kitchen, I found her there, standing near the counter with a cup of coffee in her hands, steam rising slowly into the air. She was not dressed for display, no effort to match the environment, just a simple sweater and dark jeans, her hair loosely pulled back again, the same quiet presence she carried everywhere. She looked up when I entered, not startled, not rushed, just aware. "Good morning," she said, her voice soft but clear. I gave a short nod in response. "You are awake early," I said, more observation than question. She glanced down at her cup briefly. "I am used to mornings," she replied. "It feels strange to sleep in a place this quiet." I studied her for a moment, trying to understand what she meant, because silence had always been something I valued, something I created, something that meant control. But the way she said it made it sound different, like silence was not always comfort. Before I could respond, one of the staff members approached, slightly hesitant, holding a small tray. "Ma'am asked for fresh fruit," he said carefully, as if unsure whether that request had crossed a line. I looked at Emily. She shook her head gently. "I asked where I could find it," she corrected. "They offered to prepare it." Her tone was calm, not defensive, just clarifying. I dismissed the staff member with a glance, and he stepped away quickly, relieved. Emily took a small sip of her coffee, then added, "I hope that is not a problem." I shook my head once. It is not. And it was not. But it was new. She was not using the house the way it was designed to be used. She was not being served. She was interacting. There was a difference, and I could see it in the way the staff moved around her, less rigid, less distant, like they did not know whether to treat her as someone above them or alongside them. "You do not need to do things yourself," I said, my tone more direct now. "That is what they are here for." She met my gaze, not challenging, not submissive, just steady. "I know," she said, "but I prefer to understand where things are." That answer lingered longer than I expected. Not I prefer to do things myself. Not I do not trust them. Just I prefer to understand. It was a small distinction, but it revealed something I had not considered. She was not rejecting the structure. She was learning it. On her own terms. I turned slightly, moving toward the doorway, but I did not leave immediately. "There will be guests this weekend," I said. "People who will expect certain things." She nodded once. "I will be ready." No hesitation. No questions about who, why, or how. Just readiness. I paused for a second longer, watching her as she set her cup down and reached for a piece of fruit from the tray that had been left behind, her movements unhurried, natural, like she belonged in that moment more than anything else in the house did. And that was when it became clear. She was not trying to fit into my world. She was slowly reshaping the space around her without forcing it. Without asking. Without permission. And for the first time, I realized that control was not always something you took. Sometimes, it was something that shifted quietly, one small change at a time, until you no longer recognized where it had gone. I did not plan to watch her, but I started noticing her anyway, not in obvious ways, not in moments that demanded attention, but in the quiet spaces in between, where people usually revealed who they really were. It happened over the next few days, small details that should have meant nothing, but somehow did. The staff moved differently. Around her now, not stiff, not overly careful, just more at ease, and I realized it was because she spoke to them, not above them, not through them, but directly, remembering names, asking simple questions, listening to answers as if they mattered. I saw it in the way the house felt less like a structure and more like something lived in, even though nothing major had changed. No furniture replaced. No rules broken. Just subtle shifts in how space was used. And then there was the garden. I found her there late one afternoon, standing near the edge of the property where the landscaping ended and the trees began, a place most people ignored because it was not designed to impress. She was kneeling near a patch of soil, her hands lightly brushing against the leaves of something small and green, something that had probably been planted years ago and forgotten. She did not notice me at first, or maybe she did and chose not to react. That plant is not part of the original design, I said, my voice cutting through the quiet. She looked up, not startled, just acknowledging my presence. No, she said. It looks like it grew on its own. I stepped closer, my shoes pressing against the gravel path, my gaze shifting from her to the plant. It was nothing special, just something that had survived without being maintained. It does not belong here, I said. She tilted her head slightly, considering that. Maybe it does, she replied. It just was not planned. I looked at her then, really looked at her, trying to understand why she would defend something so insignificant. Everything here is planned, I said. That is how it works. She brushed a bit of dirt from her fingers, standing slowly, her movements unhurried. That does not mean everything that is unplanned is wrong, she said. There was no challenge in her tone, no attempt to argue, just a quiet statement that lingered longer than it should have. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The air felt different out there, less controlled, less defined, and I realized I had not stood in this part of the property in months. Maybe longer. You spend time out here often? I asked, more out of curiosity than intention. She nodded once. It is quiet, she said. Then, after a small pause, not the kind of quiet that feels heavy. I did not respond immediately. I understood what she meant, even if I had never described it that way. There was a difference between silence that was chosen and silence that was enforced. I had built my world on the second kind. She seemed to live in the first. A faint breeze moved through the trees, carrying the scent of something clean, something real, and for a brief second, I felt out of place in my own space. I did not like that feeling. There will be guests tomorrow evening, I said, shifting the conversation back to something structured, something predictable. People who will observe you, form opinions. She met my gaze, steady as always. They already have, she said. That caught me off guard. Based on what? I asked. She gave a small, almost amused smile. Based on what they expect to see, she replied. It usually has nothing to do with who is actually standing in front of them. I studied her for a long moment, realizing she was not unaware of how she was perceived. She understood it, accepted it, and still did not try to change it. You should be careful, I said. Perception matters. She nodded once. It does, she agreed. Then she added, softly, but it is not everything. I had spent years building a life where perception was everything. Power, respect, control, all of it tied to what people believed about me. And yet, standing there, looking at her, I had the distinct feeling that she operated outside of that entirely. And that was dangerous. Not because she threatened what I had built, but because she did not recognize it as something that needed to be feared. And for the first time, I began to wonder if that made her stronger than anyone else in my world. The house changed again that evening, but this time it was not subtle, it was deliberate, controlled, and unmistakable, the way it always was when people from my world stepped inside it. Lights were adjusted to perfection, staff moved with sharper precision, every detail aligned to create an atmosphere that spoke without words, power, wealth, control. By the time the first car arrived, everything was exactly as it should be. Predictable, measured, untouchable. Emily stood at the top of the staircase when I saw her, and for a moment, I did not recognize her, not because she had transformed into someone else, but because she had not. She wore a simple black dress, elegant but not excessive, her hair loosely styled, nothing about her demanding attention, and yet she drew it anyway. Not because she tried, because she did not. That was the difference. Stay close, I said quietly as I reached her, my voice low enough that no one else would hear. Observe. Do not engage unless necessary. She glanced at me, her expression calm, unchanged. I understand, she said. No hesitation. No resistance. Just that same quiet acceptance. The doors opened, and the first group of guests entered, voices smooth, controlled, eyes sharp behind polite smiles. They greeted me with the usual respect, the usual measured words, but I could already feel their attention shifting past me, toward her. It was subtle at first, quick glances, small pauses, the kind of reactions people tried to hide but never fully could. Then came the whispers, low, contained, but present. I did not need to hear them to know what they were saying. She was not what they expected. She was not what they would have chosen. And in my world, that was enough to form judgment. Emily remained beside me, her posture relaxed, her gaze steady, acknowledging greetings when they were offered, speaking only when spoken to, her voice soft but clear, never overreaching, never retreating. She did exactly what I had told her to do. And yet, something about it did not feel like obedience. It felt like choice. As the evening progressed, the comments became less subtle, disguised as curiosity, wrapped in politeness that did not quite reach sincerity. "She seems different," one of the women said, her tone light, but her eyes sharp. I met her gaze without reacting. "She is," I replied. That was all. Across the room, I noticed Emily speaking with one of the staff members, her attention fully on him as he explained something, her expression focused, engaged, like the conversation mattered. Not once did she glance around to see who was watching. Not once did she adjust herself to fit the expectations surrounding her. She simply existed within the space, unchanged by it. That was when I saw it. The shift. It was small, almost invisible, but it was there. People who had dismissed her minutes ago were now watching her differently. Not because she had impressed them, but because she had not tried to. It unsettled them. And in my world, anything that unsettled people had power. Later in the evening, as the room filled with conversation and movement, I found myself watching her more than I intended, tracking her without realizing it, noticing how she navigated interactions with the same quiet consistency, never forcing presence, never avoiding it. She did not belong here. And yet, she was not out of place. That contradiction pulled attention in ways I had not anticipated. When she finally stepped back toward me, her expression unchanged, I studied her for a moment longer than necessary. "Are you uncomfortable?" I asked, my tone neutral. She shook her head slightly. "No," she said. Then, after a pause, "They are." I almost smiled at that. Not because it was amusing, but because it was accurate. I had spent years building a world where discomfort was a tool I used against others. And now, without effort, without intention, she was creating it simply by being herself. That realization settled quietly in my mind, heavier than I expected. Because for the first time, I understood something I had overlooked from the beginning. She was not weak. She was not outmatched. She was just different. And in a world built on control, sometimes the most dangerous thing was not power. It was the absence of the need for it.